I've been with Simon for 3 years. Until he hugged his official girlfriend right in front of me and got down on one knee to pull out a ring. At that moment, I finally felt exhausted. Past midnight, the bedroom door handle turned softly. A cool embrace surrounded me from behind, and my nose was instantly filled with a mix of cologne. I closed my eyes as Simon spoke hoarsely, "Amy, I know you aren't asleep." I stayed silent, unmoving in his arms. Then, a box was pushed in front of me. Simon's tired voice came through, "Happy Valentine's Day. This is your gift." He seemed really tired. I heard he took Fiona to a yacht party today, and playing until late must have drained him. He's never been one to stay up late. "Amy, be understanding. I came back just to be with you." Seeing I didn't respond, Simon softened his tone, resting his chin on my shoulder. Soon, his breathing became steady. After a while, I slowly opened my eyes in the dark and reached for my phone. The screen lit up abruptly in the night. It was August 15th, 12:47 am. Valentine's Day was already over yesterday. The dinner I prepared had long gone cold and congealed, and I had thrown everything in the trash. The small box Simon gave me was still by the corner of the pillow. I didn't pick it up to look. I knew it already. It was a Cartier bracelet. Fiona loves Cartier, and Simon never remembers what I like. Or maybe he doesn't bother to remember, so he just buys 2 of whatever Fiona likes and gives me 1. Just like how he is. I've been Simon's mistress for 3 years. Our relationship is complicated, hard to explain. Actually, at first, I was Simon's official girlfriend. He was my first love. For the first 2 years, we were inseparable. People around us praised us as a perfect match. I always thought we would get married. Until 2 years later, I saw Fiona in Simon's phone for the first time. That's when I realized my idea of a perfect match was a joke. Simon's family background was beyond what I could imagine. Reality isn't a fairy tale. The prince and the Cinderella were never meant to be, and Fiona was the princess his family arranged for him. He couldn't refuse and wouldn't dare to. At first, I couldn't accept it. I cried, fought, and demanded we break up. But then my dad got sick, and my family couldn't afford the exorbitant medical bills. Simon gave me $900,000 and forced me to continue being his girlfriend. So I turned from a girlfriend into a mistress. I woke up the next morning in Simon's arms. Simon is possessive, to put it bluntly, like a dog marking his territory. Very dominant. So he never allowed me to leave. I moved his hand away, but Simon tightened his arm, his voice still a bit sleepy. "Amy, let me make it up to you today for Valentine's Day." My hand touched my lower abdomen as I hesitated whether to tell him. Yesterday, I used a pregnancy test, and it was 2 lines. It must have been that one time he drank too much, and we forgot protection. It was supposed to be a safe period, so we didn't pay attention. When my period was late this month, I panicked. Our situation isn't suitable for a baby right now. I hesitated but finally spoke. Maybe I felt Simon had the right to know, or perhaps deep down, I still had some hidden, unrealistic hope. I whispered, "Simon, I'm pregnant." I read about how men react when they find out they're becoming dads. Some are ecstatic, some can't accept it. But Simon was neither. I felt his body freeze tightly against mine, then suddenly he sat up. The mattress sank beside me. I turned to see Simon's expression was hard to describe. It wasn't pure joy or anger but a mix of countless emotions, making his lips move without words. I looked at his high nose bridge and gray glassy eyes. A thought flashed in my mind. If the baby looks like him, it would be beautiful. After a while, Simon took a deep breath. He slowly placed his hand on my abdomen, slightly trembling. "I can't feel it," he tilted his head, puzzled. Seeing such a childish expression on him for the first time, I couldn't help but smile. "Not so soon, it's probably still a fertilized egg. It'll take another 4 or 5 months to show." I lifted my head slightly towards Simon and hesitated before saying, "About this baby?" I didn't know if Simon would allow this baby's existence. It would make our already tangled relationship even more complicated. But as a mother, knowing about its existence created a strange connection with this tiny being. Simon's reaction was joyous, which gave me some relief. "We're keeping it." His rosy lips curled into a gentle smile. He lightly touched my abdomen, almost carefully. "I'm going to be a dad?" Simon furrowed his brows lightly, then relaxed, a fleeting smile in his eyes. "I'm really going to be a dad?" He hugged me, and his voice had a barely noticeable tremble. "Thank you, Amy. I don't know what to do, but I will take care of you, take care of our baby, and be a good dad." Simon kept murmuring endlessly. A familiar warmth filled the void in my broken heart, spreading through my whole body. I hugged him back. "Okay." Simon seemed genuinely to care about this baby. We used to have just one housekeeper. Now he hired another one just to make meals for me. Various supplements flowed into our home like water. He used to spend more time with Fiona, but now he comes home right after work and rarely goes out. The new housekeeper smiled at me and said, "Your husband is so good to you. You're really lucky." I hadn't even started talking when Simon handed me a bowl of bird's nest soup and said with a smile, "Isn't it my duty to take care of my wife?" I glanced sideways at Simon. He looked happy and confident, like a man genuinely excited about becoming a dad. We were slowly mending our relationship. Our broken pieces were coming together. But the conflicts between him and Fiona were becoming more frequent. A few times, I even overheard Fiona yelling at him on the phone. I stroked Simon's black hair while he lay on my lap, eyes closed, resting his head on my belly. "Is everything okay?" I traced his eyebrows with my fingers. "I've been hearing you two argue a lot lately." "It's nothing," Simon said, holding my hand, his brow furrowing slightly. "She's just so demanding. Everything has to go her way, or she throws a fit." He sighed softly. "Amy, you're so much better." I stayed silent. "She's demanding because she can afford to be. What right do I have to be demanding? If I had a choice, I'd rather not share him with someone else, especially not in secret, like a rat in the gutter. My parents wanted me to thrive like a peach blossom, but I ended up more like moss growing in the shadows." Time went by. Neither Simon nor I mentioned Fiona again. I held on to my secret hope. Maybe I still had a chance. Now that we had a child, if Simon truly loved me, he would make a choice. And he did make a choice, just not the one I hoped for. September's evenings carried a hint of autumn. The night breeze cooled the air and scattered the cloud. Stars filled the high, distant sky. Fireworks exploded over the sea, creating dazzling reflections on the water. The fireworks were gorgeous, cascading into the sea like celestial flowers. Then, a swarm of drones formed a heart shape, transforming into a hand and a round ring. Someone was proposing. I leaned on the balcony railing, watching with interest. Even though this was not my ideal proposal, I preferred a quiet walk on the beach followed by a sudden ring. Watching someone else's joy was still heartwarming. Those fireworks and drones cost a fortune. The guy must have put a lot of thought into it. I felt a pang of envy, Simon's handsome face floating in my mind. The drones formed a hand placing the ring, and more fireworks lit up the sky, painting it bright with colors. I smiled and picked up my ringing phone, but my expression froze. A mutual friend on Instagram had messaged me. She seemed hesitant, choosing her words carefully. But her message cut through me like a knife, leaving me breathless and wounded. "Amy, Simon proposed to Fiona. Did you know?" My fingers went ice cold as I opened the picture she sent. Fireworks lit the sea, drones filled the sky, and Simon was there on one knee, holding out a ring. His face glowed with joy, outshining even the sparkling diamond. Fiona, eyes red and tearing, covered her mouth in a joyful, crying smile. So, this proposal was for him and her. Strangely, the pain in my chest vanished. I felt like I was outside my own body, watching everything from above. They looked perfect together, a match made in heaven. And I was just an observer in the shadows, quietly watching. I didn't scream or cry in despair. I just thought calmly. Finally, this day arrived, sooner than I expected. I was 3 months pregnant, eagerly waiting for our child's arrival, while he proposed to someone else. Simon didn't come home that night. I sat by the window the whole time. Mary tried to console me several times, reminding me that staying up all night was bad for the baby. I nodded, touching my belly softly. It's okay. Nothing will hurt us anymore. The next afternoon, Simon returned, looking tired but smiling when he saw me. Amy, come give me a hug. I walked over and held him without a word. Simon placed his hand on my belly, his voice tender. How's our little one doing? Did he grow overnight? I held him and quietly asked, You proposed to Fiona, didn't you? Simon's body stiffened. He pushed me away, looking awkward. How did you know? I smiled faintly, changing the subject. The fireworks were beautiful. Simon pursed his lips, and his gray eyes darkened in the shadow. He pressed my shoulders gently. Amy, let me explain. Our company is in financial trouble. We need immediate funds, and marrying Fiona is the only way for help. Amy, I had no choice. I glanced down at my belly. What about the baby? Will he be born as a bastard? Simon hesitated. After a moment, he said, Not a bastard. This is my child. I'll make sure he's taken care of. Amy, don't worry. Everything I have will be his someday. And what about Fiona's child? I looked up at him. Simon's jawline tightened, and he rubbed his hair irritably, his tone heavier. So what do you want me to do? Marry you? Amy, you know that's not realistic. Life isn't a fairy tale or a game of house. We need to survive. If I marry you, what can you give me? Are we going to beg under a bridge together? That was outrageous. Even though the Smith family hit hard times, their overseas assets could still ensure a luxurious life forever. Let's face it, it's just human greed. In his heart, money is always the priority. The kid and I are secondary, expendable even. I suddenly felt at a loss for words. Actually, I had expected this outcome before Simon returned. He's a capable, ambitious businessman but a lousy husband and an even worse father. For me and Fiona, I don't know who's worse off. I watch my child's father proposing to another woman, while Fiona, thrilled, accepts her boyfriend's proposal, unaware he's with someone else. Be sensible. Simon noticed his earlier tone was harsh. He kneeled on one knee on the carpet and softened his voice. My relationship with Fiona is just a business arrangement. I have no feelings for her. My heart is with you. I promise our child won't lack anything. I'll provide the best for them, okay? I looked at him for a moment and then nodded lightly. That's better, Simon smiled slightly. He took off his gold-rimmed glasses and pressed his head against my belly. The three of us will be very happy. I ran my fingers through his dark hair and remained silent. Simon stayed home for just a few hours before packing up and leaving again. Because Fiona wanted a proposal trip. The Smith family owns an island abroad, and they were going to spend half a month there. Before leaving, Simon kissed me on the head and softly said, like comforting a child, Stay at home and wait for me to come back. I smiled and waved as the elevator doors closed, separating our views. This is it, I told myself. This is good enough. Back in the room, I took out a card. It held all my earnings over the past 3 years, around $120,000. When I found out about Fiona, I resolutely wanted to break up with Simon. But then my dad got sick. The surgery alone cost $60,000, an astronomical figure for me back then. Never mind the subsequent medical expenses, which I couldn't afford. My dad was waiting for surgery on one side, and Simon approached me on the other. He stood before me, condescendingly offering me 2 choices. Take his money and pay for my dad's treatment, with the best doctors assuring my dad's recovery. Or break up with him and find the money on my own. At that time, it felt like the sky was falling. I still don't want to recall those days. I sold my house, borrowed money, and prepaid my salary. I tried everything. I even considered selling a kidney. But the hospital costs were like a bottomless pit. I was penniless and desperate, crying on the roadside. Simon found me and handed me a card. "There's $1 million here. Stay with me, and I'll cover your dad's medical expenses." My mom passed away early, and my dad and I had been together for over 20 years. Watching him die would have been more painful than killing me. That day on the curb, it was sweltering, my brain felt fried. I sat there for half an hour, and then a tear fell on the ground. I reached out and took the card. From then on, I went from Simon's girlfriend to his mistress. I traded my dignity and principles for that $1 million, not a bad price. Over the years, Simon wouldn't let me work, fearing I'd repay the debt and leave him. But whenever he wasn't home, I did freelance work. I took design jobs, wrote articles, ran an online store, and wrote scripts. Without him knowing, in 3 years, plus the money from selling my house, I saved over $120,000. I've been waiting for this day. Even though I had hopeless fantasies while basking in his affection, I always knew this day would come. Simon would never give up his career for me. He'd inevitably marry Fiona. And when they did, that's when I'd leave. This house was full of my things, but I took very little. Simon bought me luxury bags, clothes, and jewelry, but I didn't take any. Just the clothes I wore 3 years ago and my ID. I told Mary the first might be out for a few days and not to tell Simon. Oh, and give him this card when he gets back. I handed Mary the card. When he gave me $1 million, my dad's medical expenses cost $900,000, so there were $100,000 untouched. I added another $1 million with interest and kept $20,000 for myself. Mary saw how gloomy I'd been and was happy I was going out. "Great, have fun and take care of yourself and the baby. Call if you need anything." I smiled, sure. The elevator descended floor by floor, and before leaving, I took a final look at the house where Simon and I had lived. Starting today, I'd leave, just like leaving Simon. Simon was probably still on the plane. His last message to me was still "wait for me." I looked at it for a while and then blocked him. Strangely, I didn't feel heartbroken. Instead, I felt an indescribable sense of relief. After 3 years of being an unseen mistress, I no longer had sleepless, restless nights. I was free. My heavy footsteps gradually turned light, and I jogged to catch a cab to the airport. Simon never traveled with me, fearing the media. So for 3 years, I felt caged. But I wasn't always like this. I used to love traveling. I gazed at the horizon from snowy peaks, galloped across grasslands, drank in an Italian tavern in Matera, and dived in the Philippine seas. What has turned me into what I am now, like a walking dead, a living corpse? I didn't hesitate. I bought the next flight ticket to Malaysia. I needed tropical sun and seawater to wash away the damp cold coming from the north. I fell asleep on the plane, and when I opened my eyes again, we had already landed. The sun in Hainan was scorching and dazzling. I grabbed my suitcase, got a taxi, and headed straight for the hotel I had booked earlier. I didn't skimp this time. I reserved the best room in a 5-star hotel, costing more than $8,000 a night. I wanted to have a blast and completely say goodbye to the past. After several hours of flight, I was already exhausted. I checked in, swiped my card, and pushed the door open, ready to crash, but what I didn't expect was there was a man lying on my bed. A sturdy, bare-chested man. I was stunned. This man, wearing gray joggers, was red-faced, veins bulging on his forehead, scratching his throat in pain. 1,000 images flashed through my mind in an instant. Was he drugged? What kind of novel plot is this? I panicked, thinking I had entered the wrong room. I hastily apologized and was about to leave, but the man made gargling sounds from his throat, looking at me anxiously, with tears even welling up at the corners of his eyes. The man's face was already turning purple. He pointed frantically at his throat and then towards a bag of nuts by the bedside. That's when I realized. Geez, he isn't drugged, he's choking on nuts. I rushed up and hugged him from behind, disregarding gender propriety, and used the Heimlich maneuver, crossing my hands over his stomach and pushing hard backward. Once, twice, 3 times. This man's muscles were too hard, and he was much taller than me, nearly as tall as one head above me. Hugging him took effort, and I huffed as I struggled. Luckily, he didn't struggle much. On the seventh push, a nut finally flew out of his throat, and he gasped for air, falling to his knees. I was exhausted too, sitting down heavily, asking him, "Are you okay?" He coughed several times before turning his head. I was surprised to find that, with the redness fading, he had a really handsome face. Unlike Simon's cold, restrained look, this man's appearance was wild. His skin was a perfect suntan shade, with thick black eyebrows and deep dark eyes that carried a rebellious air when looking at someone. But his actions weren't rebellious. He reached out to shake my hand, his voice sincere with a hint of a northern accent. "Thank you, really, thank you. If you hadn't come today, next year on this day would have been my death anniversary." His hand was hot and dry. I couldn't help but laugh and cry as I was pulled by him, only able to shake with his motion and say, "It was nothing, no need for thanks." He stood up, his throat still seemed a bit uncomfortable, took a bottle of mineral water, and drank. The clear water flowed from his mouth to his chin and then dripped onto his tanned muscles, leaving a trail. I struggled to pull my gaze away from his sides to find abs and the enticing V-line, suddenly realizing the problem. "Why are you in my room?" I asked, puzzled. He turned around and casually wiped the water from his mouth, confused. "This is my room, but you can stay if you want." I rolled my eyes and called the front desk. After some checking, they apologized, saying there was a system error. The room was booked but didn't show up on their system. I frowned, then changed me to another room. The receptionist hesitated. "Sorry sir, we're fully booked, but we can double compensate your room fee if you stay at another hotel." I looked out the window. It was already past 10 at night, and it was dark outside. The place was by the seaside with only this one 5-star hotel. Other slightly inferior hotels were also fully booked as I had just checked the app. The nearest hotel was over 2 hours away. But I was too tired to move, feeling like the mattress was sucking me in, holding me immobile. The man seemed to read my thoughts, putting on a black t-shirt from a chair casually and pointing to a room on the side. "It's a suite. There's another room there. If you don't mind, you can stay here. Just lock the door at night." After some hesitation and another futile check on the booking app, seeing the nearest available hotels were over 40 kilometers away, I gritted my teeth and nodded, "Fine." I went into the room, locked the door, and hooked my clothes on the lock. Only then did I change and lie down. Lying on the bed, I picked up my phone. The message box was empty. Simon hadn't tried to contact me. Figures. He should be on the island with Fiona now. Maybe Simon was always deceiving me. After being with Fiona for so long, perhaps even a stone would warm up. Maybe he liked her. But this had nothing to do with me anymore. I opened my phone and booked an abortion for the next week, then gently touched my belly, trembling. The life inside was not yet formed, perhaps not even a child yet. But I felt an intense sadness and pain. "I'm sorry," I murmured to myself. "I'm really sorry, but I can't keep you, letting you bear the stigma of being an illegitimate child coming into this world. I had no choice but to become the other woman, but I won't let my child be born an illegitimate child. I cannot and will not keep this child, my and Simon's child." Early in the morning, I was awoken by knocking. Groggily, I opened the door to find Ken, the man I saved yesterday, standing outside with a wide grin. "It's breakfast time. If we don't go now, we'll miss it." Rubbing my eyes, I realized I'd slept until 9:30. "Hurry up," he said, "I'm waiting." His tone was so casual I didn't know how to refuse. Confused and groggy, I washed up, got ready, and let him pull me downstairs. The food was a so-so, but you must try their seafood noodles in the morning, Ken said. "It's super fresh." He led me to a seat in the restaurant. Ken skillfully brought over 2 small bowls of noodles, poured 2 spoonfuls of thick sauce on top, and placed one in front of me. He handed me chopsticks and said, "Quick, try it." He propped his chin with one hand, grinning. I didn't know what to say, so I just picked up a tiny bit of the noodles soaked in the thick sauce and stuffed it in my mouth. Surprisingly, it was delicious. Since having the kid, Simon always told the nanny to cook with less oil and salt and make soup for me every day. It was torture for me to eat. But Simon didn't allow me to order takeout. I could only sneak out to eat occasionally, always fearing he'd find out. The noodles here didn't have a lot of oil, but were heavily flavored, just how I liked. I hadn't eaten anything all day. What was a 7 out of 10 good now felt like a 12. I scarfed down the entire bowl in a few bites. Ken's bowl was still untouched. He raised an eyebrow at me in surprise and pushed his bowl towards me. Want more? I gulped and thought to myself, I saved his life yesterday. Eating another bowl today isn't too much. So, I nodded and finished off his bowl too. As I put down the chopsticks and was about to thank Ken, he quickly finished his noodles and pulled me up. I looked at him. Ken smiled, his eyes reflecting the bright sunshine in a lighter brown shade, half hidden in the shadow of his prominent nose, resembling the eyes of a cat or a panther. You're a tourist, aren't you? To thank you for saving my life, I'll show you around for the next few days. I shook my head. Thanks, but no. I prefer to explore on my own. I was about to leave when Ken grabbed me, smiling. Come on, don't be so formal. Holding my hand, he led me out of the restaurant, talking as we went. I have a jet ski. Let's go out to sea. If you go alone, you'll have to queue for at least 3 hours. I swallowed my refusal. I didn't want to wait 3 hours in line. Ken took me to the seaside, and true to his word, he had a jet ski. He handed me a life jacket, and after I put it on, he stepped onto the jet ski and motioned behind him, hop on. I carefully stepped onto the jet ski and sat behind him, unsure whether to hold onto the back handles or grab his shirt. Ken wasn't shy. He took my hands and placed them around his waist. Hold tight. Then he twisted the jet ski's handle, and with a roar, we sped off. I was so scared that I clung to his waist, forgetting to be embarrassed. Ken's abs were firm and well-defined. I felt like I was taking advantage of him, not knowing where to place my hands. Luckily, he didn't mind and just sped around the sea with me. Feeling a bit giddy, I shouted in his ear, "Can I try?" I thought Ken would refuse, but he nodded and shifted slightly to move me in front. Not too far, he said. I rolled my eyes and twisted the handle hard. The jet ski buzzed to life, and Ken grabbed hold of me. His chest was warm and solid, radiating a unique male warmth mixed with the scent of seawater and sunshine. I got distracted, forgot to slow down for a turn, and we both tumbled into the sea. Are you drunk driving? Ken joked, emerging from the water and shaking his head. Floating in the water, I spat out a mouthful of seawater and said, sorry. It's my first time driving without a license. Ken swam over, righted the jet ski, and pulled me back on. We were both soaked. He glanced at me and quickly turned away, his ears slightly red. I looked down at my slightly see-through cover-up, bit my lip, and tied the life jacket straps. By the time we returned in the evening, the sky was already filled with crimson clouds. I showered, changed, and stepped out onto the balcony. Footsteps approached behind me, and a cold soda appeared at my side. Following the tanned, muscular arm, I saw Ken with a cigarette in his mouth. Here. I wasn't interested in the soda, but the cigarette in Ken's mouth made me crave one. After becoming Simon's secret lover, I had gotten my dad's medical expenses covered. My dad lived for another 2 years due to the surgery, but eventually, he still passed away. During that difficult time, I picked up a smoking habit. However, Simon got furious and we had a big fight over it. He strictly forbade me from smoking. So, I quit. But now, seeing the cigarette in Ken's mouth, that old craving stirred up again. My throat moved. Ken glanced at me, smiled, and pulled out a cigarette. Want a puff? I swallowed and shook my head. I quit. Good. He didn't say more, just leaned beside me to watch the sunset. Curious, I asked, what do you do? Are you here on vacation too? Ken took a drag and exhaled a puff of smoke. His face was partly hidden in the smoke. No, I live here. This hotel is mine. I thought he was joking, so I laughed and said nothing. What about you? Ken flicked the cigarette butt into the trash. Taking some time off? I hesitated, then lowered my head. Sort of, a long break after quitting my job over the next few days. I hung out with Ken a lot. At first, I wasn't keen on spending all my time with another guy. But his enthusiasm was infectious, and every morning he would knock on my door. Eventually, I got used to his company and we explored every corner of the area together. Sometimes, I was grateful for his presence, allowing me to temporarily forget about Simon. But what's meant to happen will eventually happen. One evening while having dinner with Ken, my phone rang. For a moment, I forgot about Simon and thought it was a spam call. I answered it casually. There was a moment of silence on the other end, then a cold voice said, "Amy, where are you?" My heart skipped a beat, and I almost spilled the water I was holding. Ken looked up at me. I panicked, got up, and walked to the side. "Where I am is none of your business, Simon. I've paid you back every penny, including the interest. I didn't change the password. I closed my eyes. We've broken up." There was a pause, then a chilling reply, "Broken up?" Did I agree? I gripped my phone tightly, feeling a bit breathless. "I don't need your permission, I'm not asking for your opinion, I'm informing you." Simon's voice grew colder. "Amy, I don't have time for your games. Come back now, I'm coming home next week." I took a deep breath, holding back my anger. "I'm not playing games. I'm breaking up with you. Don't you understand plain English? What do you want me to do?" Simon was furious. "Break up with Fiona and marry you? Amy, you're pregnant. Can you stop being so childish?" At this moment, I couldn't even feel the heartache, only rage. Just as I was about to respond, a hand took my phone. Ken stood in front of me, his face shadowed by the backlight, his brows slightly furrowed, looking a bit impatient. "She just told you she's breaking up with you. Don't you understand plain English? Don't come looking for her again, we're busy." With that, he straightforwardly hung up the phone. The phone was silent for a moment, then started ringing frantically. Ken quickly blocked and deleted Simon before shutting off the phone and putting it back in my hand. "Ex-boyfriend?" He glanced at me. I nodded. "So, this whole trip is a breakup trip, huh? You trickster." Ken looked a bit annoyed, crossing his long legs as he leaned against a tree and stared at me. I didn't know what to say. To me, being Simon's mistress felt like a secretive and shameful job. Calling it a termination trip wouldn't be an exaggeration. But I didn't know how to explain it to Ken, so I just stood there, feeling all mixed up. The evening breeze carried a trace of summer warmth, and the huge leaves of nearby coconut trees rustled. After a moment, Ken said, "All right then, let's go drink. I'll join you in drowning your sorrows." Ken didn't take me to a bar but bought some drinks and took us to the beach. The sunset glow turned intense, a dreamy pink spreading across the skyline, turning the whole world into a surreal blush of purple. We sat on the beach, Ken opened a beer, and the carbon dioxide fizzed out with a cool mist. I held my beer silently. It had been a long time since I drank, because Simon wouldn't let me. To him, smoking and drinking were lowly habits. "Spill it." Ken took a swig, his Adam's apple bobbing, leaving a trace of moisture. "Did a jerk trick you?" I lowered my head, fiddling with the sand. Simon was indeed a jerk, but I wasn't tricked. I went along willingly. I shouldn't confide in someone I'd only known for a few days, but I had no one to talk to these past few years, and it was suffocating. After a long pause, I spoke softly. "Do you think a man who truly loves a woman would not marry her?" "What do you mean?" Ken looked puzzled. "I mean, I bit my lip. What if there were various difficulties, financial, social, or interpersonal, and it seemed like we were mismatched?" Ken scoffed. "That's all bullshit in plain English, you're just not important enough. If a guy truly likes someone, those things don't matter. If I really liked someone, I'd stay with her no matter the difficulties." He was right, I understood that perfectly. But these past 3 years, I had been molded by Simon into someone I barely recognized, suppressed and changed. As I was feeling miserable, Ken walked away. I thought he was going to the restroom. To my surprise, he spoke with the owner of a surfboard shop nearby, who handed him a guitar. I watched as Ken, barefoot, walked to a raised rock on the beach in front of me, sat down, and tuned the guitar, a mischievous smile curling on his lips. "I'll sing you a song. I promise you'll feel better." I thought he was going to sing a love song, but as soon as he strummed the chords, the familiar melody felt a bit off. Trying not to laugh, I was ready to tease him, but his singing voice stunned me. Ken's voice was already deep with an inexplicable magnetism, but when he sang, it had an added huskiness. A song I found a bit old-fashioned sounded, surprisingly, kinda sexy when he sang it. Shirtless, his well-defined muscles glistened with sweat under the moonlight, and silver-white sand clung to his strong forearms, falling off with his movements. Ken sang, looking down at me, his long fingers strumming the guitar strings forcefully, his eyes carrying an unspoken intensity, making my face heat up uncontrollably. Ken was unlike anyone I'd ever met. He was like the sun, his intense warmth impossible to hide, brightly illuminating all shadows. As the last note faded, the sunset had almost vanished. Bathed in the rippling dusk, Ken leaned closer to me. He was so close I could feel his warm breath, his dark eyes staring straight at mine, almost pulling me in on me. His voice was husky. "There are plenty of good guys in this world. Why fixate on just one?" With that, he leaned down, gently pressing a kiss to my lips. I didn't pull away. Ken's breath grew hotter, and just as he was about to deepen the kiss, I turned my head sharply and stood up. He looked confused, staring up at me, not understanding why I suddenly rejected him. I wiped my mouth, murmured a flustered apology, and hurried back to the hotel. For a moment, I had been tempted. To be honest, Ken was incredibly attractive. His allure wasn't just in his sharp features and nearly perfect body, but in his open ardor and dangerous intensity. I could tell he was interested in me. But in my current state, it wouldn't be right to jump into a new relationship, whether serious or casual. I couldn't let myself fall apart. It was time to leave this place. The next morning, when Ken knocked on my door again, I had already packed my bags. I opened the door and he glanced at the luggage by my feet. The smile on his face faded instantly. A moment later, he spoke with a hint of mockery in his voice. "You scared off that easily?" I explained, "No, I was supposed to go back today anyway. I bought the ticket a while ago. I've got things to do back home." "So what about me?" Ken stood in front of me, looking down. The light behind him made his expression hard to read. I didn't say anything. The atmosphere turned awkward for a bit. To be honest, I really didn't know what to say. What could he do? We were just two people who met by chance. I thought we both understood that. Heartless, Ken sighed, then reached out his hand to me somewhat roguishly. "So at least leave me your address and contact info, okay? I hosted you for so long, we should keep in touch, right?" I thought he was just being polite. I didn't pay much attention and gave him my Instagram, phone number, and address. He really did host me warmly these days. I didn't spend a dime, and he even paid for my room himself. I really should return the favor. Sure enough, Ken was just being polite. He glanced at the contact info I gave him and didn't offer to see me off. He simply nodded and said, "All right then, see you around." The moment the plane landed, it felt like I was in a different world. It had been so long. Ever since my dad passed away, I hadn't returned to this city. My hometown is a coastal city. It doesn't have the bright sunshine of Hainan, but it does have endless gentleness. These past days I rarely turned on my phone because Simon would call me with different numbers. But now, I had to face a bunch of things, so I had to turn it on. I thought I'd change my phone number after my surgery in a couple of days, to get Simon completely out of my life. Sure enough, as soon as I turned on my phone, an unknown number called. I sighed and answered. On the other end, Simon's voice was as calm as ever. "Amy, enough already. I've given you enough face. It's time to come home, isn't it?" I didn't know what to say, so I stayed silent. Simon seemed sure that I would definitely not leave him. Even if you don't think about yourself, you have to think about the child. Your lifestyle isn't healthy. Now that you're pregnant, no one is looking after you. Can you take care of the child? How can you be so selfish? I opened my mouth and said softly, Simon, have you ever considered if I am happy? You think about Fiona and the child, but have you thought about me? Simon's tone became harsher. What do you want me to think about? Everything you eat, wear, live in, and use, I've provided. What else do you want? I don't need those things. I sat on the couch in my old home, looking at the sunset outside. I suddenly thought of Ken's face. I don't like bird's nest soup, I don't like luxury bags, and I don't need your so-called mansions and cars, don't you know that? Simon was stunned for a moment before saying, then what do you want me to do? Anything but marriage, I can give you everything. I didn't answer his question. I just said calmly, Simon, I mean it. Don't contact me again. I will abort the child. Let's just end it here. You think you can threaten me with the child? Simon's voice turned cold on the other end. Amy, I didn't think you were like other women. You think threatening me with the child will work? He didn't finish, as I had already hung up, unable to bear it any longer. Simon was always like this, arrogant. He liked to control others and hated being defied. But I'm not his subordinate, nor his appendage. I just loved the wrong person. The surgery was scheduled for the next day. That night, I went to bed early. There were no relatives left in this city to take care of me. I might need to hire a nurse tomorrow. But around 9 p.m., my phone suddenly rang. Thought it was Simon. Feeling impatient, I hung up. But the phone kept ringing. I was annoyed and answered angrily, Are you deaf? Didn't you hear what I said? There was a brief silence on the other end, then a laugh. Why are you turning your back on me? I was stunned. It was Ken's voice. He chuckled, I'm downstairs at your place, come get me. A rush of unexpected joy filled me, but then I quickly calmed down. I slipped on my slippers and ran downstairs. Sure enough, there was a figure standing under the silk tree, the cigarette he was holding glowing intermittently. When he saw me coming, he turned his face towards me through the smoke and raised an eyebrow. Long time no see, Amy. For some reason, my eyes felt a bit sour. I almost ran to stand in front of Ken, panting, What are you here for? Ken breathed out some smoke and smiled, To find you, of course. Tears uncontrollably rolled down my cheeks. Almost in desperation, I said, You know why I came back. I came back for an abortion. Ken froze, his expression changing instantly. My heart ached as I tried to continue, but he quickly stubbed out his cigarette. You should have told me sooner. Ken waved away the smoke in front of him and furrowed his brow. Looks like my timing was just right. I'm here to be your nurse. Ken didn't stay at my place but got himself a hotel room. I thought he'd leave the next day after hearing what I said. But to my surprise, he showed up early, knocking on my door again. He seemed determined to stay. I had no choice but to take him with me to the hospital. After the doctor's examination, he raised an eyebrow at us. You two are so good looking, the child would be too. Why get rid of it? I felt a bit embarrassed, but Ken quickly replied, We both have busy jobs, no one to take care of the child, so we plan to have one later. The doctor sighed, All right. Do you want the painless option? Yes. Ken squeezed in front of me, Doctor, we want the best option. All right, surgery at 3 p.m. Make sure to take good care of your partner. Abortion really drains the energy. The surgery was over quickly. It wasn't as I expected. There was really no pain. After inhaling a few breaths of anesthesia, the world went dark. I even had a dream. I don't remember what it was about, I just remember feeling empty and alone. I don't know if I was abandoned or if I abandoned someone, but the sadness washed over me like waves. I was sinking deeper and deeper. Just when I was about to fall apart, someone woke me up. Amy, he said, wake up, I'm here. His voice pulled me out of the darkness. I struggled to open my eyes. Ken's large face looked worried. You're sweating. Are you in pain? I shook my head weakly. I'm okay. I moved my arm to touch my belly. It wasn't protruding before, and there was no change now. But I could clearly feel that something was gone. That was Simon and my child, the only link between us. Now, it's completely over. I got out of the hospital that evening. Ken moved into my place, saying he needed to take care of me. He really did start taking care of me. Every day, he did the laundry, cooked, and cleaned. A grown man wearing my pink apron, making pigeon soup for me. He made sure I noticed. How is it? Ken asked proudly. You'll feel great after drinking this, guaranteed. I laughed and cried. Where did you find ginseng? Ken gave me a side look. I dug it up in the mountains. I didn't argue with him and drank the soup from his hands. Ken was a really good cook. The soup was clear and flavorful, just the way I liked it. After dinner, Ken lay next to me. He touched my belly. Does it still hurt? It hasn't hurt for a while. I turned to look at him, hesitating a bit. Why are you so good to me? Ken put his hands behind his head and said without any reservation, because I like you. He said it so naturally, like talking about what to eat today. I was stunned for a moment, then felt my face turn bright red. Simon never told me he liked me. He thought expressing affection was shameful, so, all these years, I rarely heard I like you. What do you like about me? I didn't know how to continue. It didn't seem right for him to like me, at least not now. For a normal guy, that seemed hard to accept. Ken turned on his side, supporting his head with one hand, looking at me seriously. His tight clothes revealed his muscular lines, his forearm taut and solid, full of dangerous strength. But his words were gentle. Amy, Ken brushed away the stray hair blocking my eyes, speaking in a low voice. You just love the wrong person, but there's nothing wrong with love. I looked into his eyes and felt my nose tingle. I loved Simon, really loved him. But that love was like a knife, carving me deeply. The more I loved, the deeper it cut, causing me more pain. But is that the kind of love I want? No. I want to live proudly in the sunlight. So, Ken's rough fingers wiped away my tears. He hugged me, his body slightly warmer than mine, sweeping away my coldness. Do you want to? He didn't finish. My phone rang. I answered. Simon's voice came through. Amy, I'm back. Can we talk? I hadn't seen Simon in half a month, but seeing him again felt strange. He sat in the cafe, handing me a card. This has 50 million on it. It's enough for you and the baby. I'll put money in every month from now on. Amy, the gold-rimmed glasses reflected light. I couldn't see Simon's eyes. I know I neglected you before. I won't leave for so long again, okay? He held my hand, softening. I've been really busy lately. The company's matters are complicated. Fiona wouldn't invest unless we got married. I had no choice. I'll come home every day from now on. I've thought about it a lot. I even have a name for our child. Simon looked a bit embarrassed. He always appeared as a superior and in control. When was he ever this shy? I was surprised. Simon saw my wide eyes, pursed his lips, and looked aside, a bit awkward. He didn't finish because I cut him off, expressionless. Simon, there isn't a baby anymore. Simon stopped in his tracks, face instantly drained of color. After a while, he spoke, pale. What did you say? I lowered my head. I said, I got rid of the baby. Simon, I'm not joking. I'm done with living like a rat in the dark. Let's just end this quietly. Impossible, Simon immediately retorted. Impossible. I took out my hospital discharge form and handed it to him. He stared at it, finally taking it with shaking fingers. After a moment, he looked at me with a pained smile. It's okay, Amy. If the baby's gone, it's gone. We can still have more. How many do you want? I cut off his rambling, speaking firmly. Simon, we're done. The day you got with Fiona, we were over. Don't force it anymore. But I will force it. Simon's eyes reddened. He stood abruptly, drawing everyone's attention. I looked up at him, his calm demeanor long gone, now frantic. His eyes bloodshot, he gritted out, "Amy, you will not leave me." "Why?" "Because you said so." A lazy voice came from behind me. Turned to see Ken standing there, smirking at Simon with a mocking smile. "Are you the one who hung up on me earlier?" Simon instantly recognized Ken's voice. His expression turned cold, and he looked down at me. "Amy, is it because you have someone new that you want to leave me?" "Yes." Ken answered, grabbing me. "Let's go. You need to rest, you're still recovering." Simon couldn't take it anymore. He punched Ken in the mouth. I gasped and tried to stop him. Ken pulled me behind him with one arm. He wiped the blood off his lip with his thumb and actually smiled. He said, "I'm your dad." Then he punched Simon in the nose, knocking off his glasses. The two men started fighting right there in the cafe. Tables were flipped, and stuff went flying everywhere. People around us were startled and moved aside to watch. I was extremely worried but couldn't get between them. Simon accidentally punched me in the collarbone, and the pain made everything go dark. For a moment he froze, quickly drawing his hand back. "Amy," he called out, worried. But Ken was faster. With a dark look, he scooped me up and walked out. This time, Simon didn't stop us. He just called out from behind, "Amy, are you really willing to go?" His voice had a painful tremor to it, like a cold vine dragging me back into a dark place. Ken looked at me, seeming to ask for my opinion. I closed my eyes, letting a tear fall. "Let's go," I whispered. At home, Ken didn't say much. His mouth was cut, but he kept smiling through the pain. "Why are you smiling?" I asked, puzzled. Lying on the bed, holding me, he buried his head in my shoulder and chuckled. "You can't be with him anymore. You're stuck with me now." "How do you know?" Ken lay on his back. "Because you weren't happy with him. When I first saw you, you looked like a flower about to wither, just like today." I had no words. Yeah, Simon was like a harmful drug. He gave me moments of euphoria followed by long periods of pain and self-doubt. I couldn't even recognize my pale face in the mirror. Simon seemed like a different person. I knew he wouldn't take it well, but I didn't expect him to go this crazy. He even waited outside my home. One day, coming back from a walk, I saw a tall figure in a shirt under a street lamp. Simon didn't smoke, but there were cigarette butts scattered all around him. Ken frowned and moved to hit him again, but I grabbed his arm and shook my head. "Go back. I need to deal with this myself." Reluctantly, Ken went upstairs. "Call if you need me," he said. I turned to Simon. He looked thinner, his eyes red-rimmed, with dark circles underneath. He looked awful. I had never seen him like this. He used to be so composed, like nothing could shake him. Speechless, I waited. Simon spoke first, his voice raspy. "Amy, I've been dreaming lately. A kid keeps calling me Dad." His eyes hid behind a haze, voice trembling. I try to reach him, but he always disappears. My heart ached. That child was my unhealed wound. I tried to hide it, but the bleeding underneath always showed. Simon stomped out the cigarette, walking toward me. Up close, I saw stubble on his chin. "Amy," he said, his eyes red. "I broke off my engagement with Fiona. I don't want any of it anymore. Come back, please." I shook my head. "No." "Why? You still love me, right? If you come back, we can get married tomorrow. We can have a family and another kid." He couldn't continue. A tear fell from his chin, darkening the ground. "Amy," his words were desperate, "I'm begging you. Don't leave me." Too late. I pulled out a compact mirror from my pocket and smashed it on the ground. The mirror shattered. "Broken things can't be fixed," I whispered. "Simon, it's too late. Loving you hurts too much." I don't love you anymore. I reached out, gently touching his rough cheek. I've found my happiness. You need to learn to move on. Simon stared at me, tears following old tracks. After a pause, he asked, "What about me, Amy? You found happiness? What's left for me?" I hugged him one last time, feeling him tremble. "Simon, if you love me, don't come back. I've had enough pain. I can't handle more." Simon stayed in the city but didn't reappear in my life. Sometimes I'd see cigarette butts by the building entrance or a shadow under the street lamp. But I never met him again. One day, he just stopped showing up. I heard about him 2 months later. A woman called from an unknown number. "Hi, Amy. I'm Fiona. I know about you and Simon. He's in the hospital with stomach bleeding. Could you?" Her voice was tense with pain. "Could you come see him? He's been calling your name. He drank for days. The doctor said if he'd been any later, his stomach might have ruptured." I was taken aback. I didn't expect Fiona to tell me something like this. It's a huge slap in the face to hear your fiancé call another woman's name. It'd be humiliating for anyone. Fiona really seems to love Simon. She loves him so much that she's completely lost her dignity, just like I used to be back then. Fiona's voice was already cracking, filled with resentment and sadness. "He really loves you. He's broken up with me. You two can be together now." Then she couldn't speak anymore. She handed the phone to Simon. I hadn't heard from him in a while. His voice, once so proud and distant, was now hoarse. "Amy." He paused for a moment, speaking cautiously like he was afraid I'd vanish. I was silent, holding my phone tightly. "What's the point of this?" Simon let out a bitter laugh. "I don't know. But when you were around, I always felt like you wouldn't leave. But once you left, it felt like you took all the air with you. Every moment without you has been pure agony. Amy." He was practically begging now. "I regret it. I truly regret it. Could you come back? Whatever you want, I'll give it to you. Please." He struggled to speak, choking back tears. "I can't live without you." I listened quietly to his pleas. A few months ago, I might have felt weak and given in, but feelings that come too late are worth less than weeds. My love has run out, and my feelings are too shattered to mend. We've missed each other for too long to ever go back. After a long silence, I finally spoke. "I'm sorry." Simon was dumbfounded for a moment, then understood what I meant. His breathing on the other end of the line gradually slowed, each breath seemingly bringing immense pain, as if he couldn't breathe anymore. I didn't say another word and hung up the phone. Ken hugged me from behind, speaking roughly, "Don't you dare think about another man." The gloom in my heart was chased away. I turned and hugged his neck with a smile. Ken didn't return to Malaysia. He said the hotel was being managed and all he needed to do was collect the money. It felt like we were together, yet not really together. The wounds from my last relationship were too deep, making me scared to fall in love again. Ken seemed to understand, staying by my side silently without pushing for a relationship he didn't seem to need to work, always by my side. We ate together, walked together, slept together. His warmth gradually healed my heart. Yet, I was still scared of making the same mistake again. Ken was a great catch, and I was truly terrified of men like that. 3 months later, one night as I was watching TV in the living room, Ken suddenly rushed in and pulled me up. "There's a bioluminescent beach tonight. Hurry up." I was surprised. The beaches nearby had been showing bioluminescence recently. It's a phenomenon where marine organisms light up. As you walk on the beach, the waves emit a magical blue glow. I really wanted to see it but never managed to. Quickly, I put on my clothes and followed Ken to the beach. The beach was almost empty at night. We walked barefoot, wrapped in our jackets. The salty sea breeze, cool with the night air, blew over us from the dark waves. We walked a long way before seeing a faint blue glow. Excited, I ran over and splashed in the water. Sure enough, the water droplets scattered blue light everywhere. I turned around excitedly. There really is a bioluminescent beach. Ken smiled and came to stand behind me, watching me play happily in the water. We played for a long time, taking lots of pictures. Eventually, I got tired, so we sat down on the beach. In the distance, the horizon was shrouded in endless night. Around us, only the sea breeze and waves could be heard. I leaned quietly against Ken, watching as he built a small sand mound on the beach and stuck a stick in it. "What's that?" I asked curiously. "Haven't you played this before?" Ken asked, dead serious. "We gather sand around the stick. Whoever moves it last and knocks it over will wet the bed tonight. We used to play it all the time as kids." I rolled my eyes at him. Childish. But I honestly scooped some sand around it. Ken's sand mound was pretty big. We gathered sand a few times without toppling the stick, and I was growing impatient, so I gave it a hard swipe. Something hard seemed hidden in the sand. I thought it was a small stone and picked it up carelessly. But the stone, hidden under the sand and gravel, sparkled in the night. My heart skipped a beat. I picked it up and brushed off the sand. It was a diamond ring, probably around 3 carats, surrounded by countless smaller diamonds, dazzling even in the dark. My eyes stung with tears I couldn't hold back, and they streamed down my face. "I can't believe you buried something so expensive in the sand, you idiot!" I yelled, my voice catching. Ken just laughed. "I've been taking care of you all this time without even a title. This is a huge loss for me. Hurry up, will you or won't you? Give me a straight answer." His proposal was as rough as a debt collector, straightforward with no room for refusal. I turned to him, smiling through my tears. "All right, I guess I'll reluctantly take you in."